states that, quote, scientific research and skilled workers are the basis for new ideas, new technologies, new products and services, new companies, even entirely new industries. The American economy cannot compete and grow if we neglect our capacity to innovate.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. The other letter is from 175 universities, industries, and laboratories, including the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and it supports the goals outlined in the America Competes Act and it goes on to ask the Congress to reject the cuts adopted by the House funding bill. I would ask that that second letter also be included in the record.
Without objection.
Let me move to the issue of Homeland Security. Over the last several years, we've had a lot of speeches here in the Senate about the need to bolster border security, particularly along the southern border, enhance Homeland Security capabilities. Unfortunately, the budget that the House has presented falls short in this respect. The continuing resolution would severely impact the capabilities of the Department of Homeland Security and reduce essential assistance that is provided to organizations at the state and local level. The legislation would be a step back in terms of the progress that we are making in securing our border and ensuring that the communities and law enforcement agencies along the border have the necessary resources to handle crime and to respond to disasters. With regard to border security, the House continuing resolution would reduce planned technological, fencing, and security improvements along the southwest border. The legislation would reduce interoperable communication capabilities. It would cut tactical communication modernization efforts by 50%, making it more difficult for law enforcement to respond to emergencies in a timely way. The House bill would also provide funding for 20,500 Border Patrol agents rather than the 21,370 that the Senate is proposing to fund. This cutback in Border Patrol agents, I think, is short-sighted. The measure would also severely impact aviation security initiatives. The number of advanced imaging technology screening machines, the canine teams, the explosive detection machines would also be slashed by over 50%. Let me mention...
The senator from New Mexico has advised his 10 minutes has expired.
Mr. President, I have several other points to make, but I understand there's a limited time, so I will ask unanimous consent that my full statement be included in the record as if read.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I yield the floor.
The senator from Utah is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. In a few hours, this body will vote. This is a solemn responsibility and one that should not be taken lightly. At Gettysburg, Abraham Lincoln reminded Americans that those who died on that battlefield fought for a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. We are only here because of the people, our constituents, because they sent us here. And every time we vote, we represent them. We represent their aspirations. We represent the dreams of growing families and entrepreneurs. We represent the interest of taxpayers. Of course, not all votes are created equal. Some are more important than others. And in my view, the votes that we are taking today are transcendent. They are quite literally about the future of this country. Are we going to be a country without a constitutionally limited government? No, are we going to be a country with a constitutionally limited government? Are we going to be a country that limits the burden of taxation on individuals and families and businesses? Or are we going to become Europe? Are we going to move toward a full-blown cradle-to-grave nanny government with the majority of Americans on the public dole and a small group of individuals bankrolling an ever-expanding Leviathan state? In short, are we going to remain America, a beacon of freedom to the world? Or do we aspire to become a second European Union with high taxes, high spending, and measly economic growth? Again, I remind you that we represent the aspirations of our constituents. I represent the great people of Utah. And I can tell you that they do not wake up in the morning and say, you know what, America would be much better if we were more like France. This is no exaggeration. Right now, government spending is at 25.3% of gross domestic product. And if we do nothing, that number is just going to grow, pushing past 25 and cruising towards 28% of GDP. The last time we did that was during World War II. Republicans and Democrats have very different ideas about how to address this spike in spending. Either we can step off the pedal, hit the brakes, and bring spending back in line with historical levels that respect our Constitution of limited government and respect taxpayer citizens. Or we can keep the car on cruise control and drive the car off the cliff. Republicans want to hit the brakes. Democrats want to pull a Thelma and Louise with our economy. I, for one, am not going to sit back and allow them to do this. Let's be clear about what the Democrats and Republicans are proposing here. H.R. 1, the bill that passed the House, appropriates $1.026 billion in non-emergency discretionary spending. The alternative offered up by my Democratic colleagues would appropriate $1.079 billion in total non-emergency discretionary spending. H.R. 1, the bill passed by the new Republican majority in the House, a majority that most closely represents the views of millions of Americans who are genuinely scared about our nation's fiscal trajectory, would reduce spending by $57 billion over the current continuing resolution. The Democratic alternative would reduce spending by just $4.7 billion. You will hear Democrats complain about the draconian cuts in the House-passed H.R. 1. This is nonsense. The fact is, when you look at federal non-emergency discretionary spending as a whole, which has exploded under the Democrats' control of Congress and with President Obama's acquiescence in their big spending ways, H.R. 1 provides modest cuts. The people of Utah and the people of this country understand this. So now that Republicans are winning the game on spending cuts, Democrats are seeking to move the goalposts. It is now being suggested that we can bridge the gap between these two bills by going after entitlements and tax expenditures. Don't get me wrong, we need to address both. But I can tell the members on the other side now that we are not going to let you shift the debate. This is a debate right now about discretionary spending. This is a debate about low-hanging fruit. Last week, the Government Accounting Office issued a report detailing possibly hundreds of billions of dollars in government waste and bloat. There's plenty of fat to be cut in the discretionary budget, and doing so would give our constituents and members of Congress the courage to go after even bigger fish. And yet Democrats can't find it in themselves to cut an additional $50 billion when non-emergency discretionary spending is well over $1 trillion. Some are now proposing that we get into tax expenditures. Tax expenditures are a debate for another time. Non-defense discretionary spending has grown by 24% over the past 2 years. We can cut that back significantly. We need to do so, and Americans understand that going back to 2008 spending levels is not the end of the world. I would also like to correct the record with respect to H.R. 1 and Medicare Advantage. Just yesterday, Secretary Sebelius sent a letter to my colleague, the chairman of the Finance Committee, Senator Baucus, suggesting that H.R. 1 would have a detrimental impact on Medicare Advantage. Now, this assertion is Orwellian. The Secretary knows full well that Obamacare cuts more than $200 billion from a Medicare Advantage program that currently serves nearly 12 million seniors. According to the administration's own chief actuary, these devastating cuts will reduce enrollment in this popular program by 50%. Furthermore, the CBO has also found that these cuts would reduce important benefits by 50% for seniors enrolled in the program. H.R. 1 is intended to halt the harmful cuts to seniors in the Medicare Advantage program. Suggesting otherwise, as the Secretary did, is both inaccurate and it risks confusing millions of seniors. H.R. 1 is a good bill. It is solid and responsible, and I will be supporting it. But it is only a starting point. The fact is we're going to need many more cuts in discretionary spending. The American people, the people who sent us here, have not signed on to the Democrats' project of Europeanizing the United States economy. Citizens in every state want to roll back spending, reduce the tax burden on families and businesses, and restore America's promise of opportunity and economic growth. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle need to get with the program. We will be cutting spending, and we need to cut a lot of it. It may not all happen in the next 2 years. The American people might need to speak again and send people to Washington in 2012 who will accurately represent their interests. This is a big vote today, and when we look back, I think Americans will say it was just the beginning. Mr. President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
The senator from Delaware is recognized.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
And I ask consent to speak for up to 50 minutes. All right, 5 minutes.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
Thanks, thanks. I used to be governor. I used to be, I'd say I used to be somebody, but as governor, you had to propose budgets, had to propose balanced budgets. You had to be able to balance the budget. You had to work with the legislature. I followed Mike Castle as governor. He followed Pete DuPont. And we focused very hard on fiscal responsibility. The 8 years I was governor, we had 8 balanced budgets in a row. 7 years we cut taxes. A couple of years we actually paid down some debt. We ended up with a AAA credit rating for the first time in the history of the state of Delaware. So I feel like I know something about this issue. So do a number of my colleagues. We're having a lot of debate, as we should, over what our spending plan is going to be in this continuing resolution to try to fund the government for whether it be another 2 weeks, another 4 weeks, or another 6 months. That's all well and good. That's important. We need to get started and demonstrate that we're able to reduce this deficit and reduce our debt. But we need to keep in mind that while it's important what we do in the first or the next 6 months, what's really important is what we do in the next 6 years beyond that. We've had a commission put together. A bunch of us supported creating Deficit Reduction Commission, co-chaired by Erskine Bowles and former Senator Alan Simpson. They've given us a pretty good roadmap to how to get to a more fiscally responsible place over the next 10 years, cutting some $4 trillion out of the budget deficit. And what they've said is pretty much everything needs to be on the table. Domestic spending, defense spending, entitlement programs, and tax expenditures. Tax credits, tax deductions, and that kind of thing, tax rates. And what they've suggested is a proposal that cuts the deficit by $4 trillion over 10 years, and it'll be about 2/3 of that on the spending side, maybe 1/3 or so on the revenue side. I actually think that's a pretty good approach, and I commend the 18 members of the commission who endorsed that approach. I like to, one of my core values is everything I do, I know I can do better. I think the same is true of all my colleagues, and frankly, the same is true of federal programs. And what we need to do is to replace what a lot of people think of. We have here in Washington a culture of spendthrift. We need to replace it with a culture of thrift. We need to look in every nook and cranny of the federal government at all kinds of programs and say, can we get a better result for less money? And just about everything we do. Or can we get a better result for at least not spending any more money? And as we do that, partnering with the General Accountability Office, with GAO, with OMB, with all the Inspector Generals, with nonprofit groups like Citizens Against Waste, just all of us to be focusing on what can we do to get better results for less money. And that's part of what we need to do long term. We're still going to have a lot of tough decisions, but at the end of the day, we need to, as we save some money, carve out some money, if we have the ability to spend an extra $1 or $2, where should we invest that money? Where should we invest that money in? There's a guy named John Chambers, who presiding officer knows. Some of us met with him earlier today. He's the fellow who's CEO of Cisco, a big, successful technology company. And he likes to say there's 2 things we need to do if we're going to be successful as a nation, 21st century economy. Number 1, invest in people. so we have the most productive workforce. Smart workers, whether they happen to be postdocs or they happen to be people with high school degrees. Productive workforce, number one. Number two, invest in our infrastructure. Last year, our transportation infrastructure in this country got a D, as in Delta, not good. A D, as in dumb, not good. That's where our infrastructure is in this country. We need to invest in our infrastructure, not just roads, highways, bridges, rails, port, but broadband, water, wastewater, all that broadly defined infrastructure. The third place we need to go is to invest in research and development so we can be an innovation economy, continue to be an innovation economy. The President says if we're going to be successful in the 21st century, we need to out-educate, out-innovate, out-compete the rest of the world. If we're going to out-educate people, we need to invest in our workforce, very young kids and folks that are off to college and post-secondary training. The other thing that we need to do is invest in our infrastructure, not just roads, highways, bridges, but infrastructure described broadly. And finally, invest in R&D so that we can innovate and outcompete the rest of the world. At the end of the day, if we have a successful economy, we have to create what I call a nurturing environment for job creation, for job preservation. We need a nurturing environment. And part of that is our obligation, working with the private sector and working with others, states and the local governments across the country. If we continue on the track that we're on, right now, gross domestic product, rather, debt as a percentage of GDP has climbed up to about 65%. I'm told 65%. Our debt as a percentage of GDP. The last time it was that high was the end of World War II. It's the only time it's been that high, 65%. And other countries that are getting that kind of territory, like Greece and Ireland, that's not smart. And they found out the hard way. We need to learn from them. And this is the time to do it. It requires all of us to stand up and do what we know we need to do. Sharing a sacrifice, everything on the table. Let's use the Deficit Commission as a good role model. Ask from the executive branch to provide the leadership that they need to provide. I think my time has expired, Mr. President. And with that, I will note the absence. No, I take it back. I note the presence of a senator from Kentucky who is abiding his time so that he can take the floor. But my time has expired. I yield to the gentleman from Kentucky if he wants to pursue that.
Senator from Kentucky is recognized.
We're discussing and debating two different alternatives, one from the other side of the aisle and one from our side, about what we should do about the budget deficit. We have projected a $1.65 trillion deficit in the next year. I think both alternatives are inadequate and do not significantly alter or change our course. On the Democrat side, we have a proposal to cut about $5 to $6 billion for the rest of the year. To put that in perspective, we borrow $4 billion a day. So the other side is offering up cuts equal to 1 day's borrowing. I think it's insignificant, and it will not alter the coming and looming debt crisis that we face. Now, on our side of the aisle, I think we've done more. The cuts are more significant, but they also pale in comparison to the problem. If we were to adopt the President's approach, we would have $1.65 trillion deficit in 1 year. If we were to adopt our approach, we're going to have a $1.55 trillion deficit in 1 year. I think both approaches do not significantly alter or delay the crisis that's coming. Now, it's interesting when we talk about cuts. Everybody seems to be giddy around here saying this is the first time we've talked about cuts. Well, it is better and it sounds good, but guess what? We're not even really cutting spending. What we're talking about is cutting the rate of increase of spending. The baseline of spending is going to go up at 7.3% according to the CBO. We're talking about reducing that increase to 6.7% increase. We're talking about cutting the rate of increase of government. The problem is it's not enough. Our deficit is growing by leaps and bounds. Our national debt is $14 trillion. Our national debt is now equal to our entire economy. Our gross domestic product equals our national debt. The President, I think, is tone deaf on this. We had an election, and in the election, The people said, we're concerned about out-of-control spending. We're concerned about massive deficits. We're concerned about passing this debt on to our kids and our grandkids. The President recently proposed a 10-year budget, a 10-year plan for spending. He proposes that we spend $46 trillion. That means they aren't getting it. You have, in Washington, official Washington is not getting what the people are saying, and they're not getting how profound the problems are. Spending $46 trillion, the President's plan will add $13 trillion to the debt. And the Republicans say, oh, well, ours is a lot better. Theirs will add $12 trillion to the debt. I think it's out of control, and neither plan will do anything to significantly alter things. We're spending $10 billion a day. In order to reform things, in order to change things around here, we will have to come to grips with the idea of what should government be doing? What are the constitutional functions of government? What were the enumerated powers of the Constitution? What powers did the Constitution give to the federal government? And then examine what we're actually doing. What are we spending money on that's not constitutional or shouldn't be done here or should be left to the states and the people respectively? Once upon a time, our side believed that education was a function of the states and the localities. It's not mentioned in the Constitution that the federal government should have anything to do with education. Does that mean we're opposed to education? No, we just think it should be done at a state and a local level. Ronald Reagan was a champion of eliminating the Department of Education. It was part of the Republican Party platform for 20 years. But then we got in charge after the year 2000, and we doubled the size of the Department of Education. If you are serious about balancing the budget, if you are serious about the debt, you have to look at taking departments like the Department of Education and sending it back to the states and the localities. You have to look at programs that are growing by leaps and bounds like Medicaid and food stamps, cap them, block grant them, and send them back to the states. The states can manage these things better. The more close they are to the people, the better managed they will be. The other compromise that needs to occur, and this is something our side needs to compromise on, our side has blindly said that the military should get anything at once, and it's a blank check. What do you want? Here it is. We've increased military spending by 120% since 2001. We have doubled military spending. Now, I'm for a strong national defense. I believe that it is a constitutional function of the federal government to provide for our national defense. I think it is the preeminent power, the preeminent enumerated power, the thing we should be doing here. But even that being said, we cannot every 8 years double the Defense Department, double the military spending. It's also ultimately the compromise. Within the space of a few years, everyone here will come to an agreement, not because we want to, but because we're forced to by the events and by the drama of the debt crisis. It will come. It's come to other nations. When it comes to us, the compromise that both sides of the aisle will have to work out is the other side of the aisle will have to admit we cannot have enormous domestic spending, and our side of the aisle will have to admit that we can't give a blank check to the military. We will also have to look at entitlements. Everyone's afraid to say how we reform entitlements, but there are two inescapable facts with entitlements. We're living longer, and there's a lot of people that were born after World War II that are getting ready to retire. These are inescapable demographic facts. We have to address them. If we simply do nothing, if we do not address the entitlements, within a decade, entitlements will account for the entire budget and interest. There'll be no money left for anything. So right now the argument is about all these other programs. There'll be no money left for any of these programs if we do nothing. It's going to take both sides of the aisle grappling with this and admitting that the rules and eligibility will have to change for Social Security and likely for Medicare. If you do it now, you can do it gradually. If you start now, you can gradually let the A's rise for Medicare and Social Security for those 55 and under. You do it gradually. I think young people have already acknowledged this is going to happen. You ask young people anywhere across America, do you think you're going to have Social Security when you retire? Do you think you're going to get it at 67? Most young people acknowledge that it's broken. It's broken so badly that the only way we fix it and the only way it can continue is we have to look at the eligibility. But so many people have said, oh, we can't talk about entitlement. You'll be unelected. You'll be unelectable if you talk about entitlement reform. The president still makes this mistake. He will not lead us. He will not talk and give a leadership role to entitlement reform. Someone must do it. We must stand up and be bold, because the longer these problems fester, the longer we allow them to accumulate, the bigger the problems become, the more dramatic the answers must be. If you look at Greece and these other nations that have faced debt crisis, their problem came to a head all of a sudden, and they changed the age on Social Security like that. If we want to do it gradually and let people plan for their future, you need to start now before we enter into a crisis. My problem with the discussion and the debate at this point is that I don't think either side recognizes the enormity of the problem or the imminence of the problem. Even people who would be considered to be those of the mainstream, the former Federal Reserve Chairman, Alan Greenspan, says 50% chance there will be some kind of monetary problems, significant monetary problems, even to the point of crisis in the next few years. Many people have said Japan has locked in crisis, that crisis is coming because of the debt that they've accumulated. When that comes to America, do we want to have government by crisis? Already we can't even pass a budget. We can't pass appropriation bills. Our bills do not even go to the committees anymore. They just come to the floor and we put a patchwork quilt on them, and there's a chance this winds up being 2 more weeks. We have government by 2-week edicts. It's not the way you should run government. If you want to have a significant plan for changing things, send things through the committee. If you want to have a realistic way of running government, have appropriations bills. If you want to be someone who believes in good, responsible government, for goodness sakes, pass a budget. We didn't pass a budget last year. This chart shows how big the problem is. I wish I had a magnifying glass, because that's the only way you could see the other side's proposal. $6 billion in cuts. It's 1 day's borrowing. It's not even 1 day's spending that they're talking about. It's insignificant, it's inconsequential, and it will do nothing to delay or alter the looming debt crisis. Look at the other proposal from our side. It's bigger. You can actually see it without a magnifying glass, but look how it is dwarfed by 1 year's problem. I recently proposed $500 billion in cuts, and when I went home and spoke to the people in my state, spoke to those from the Tea Party, they said, $500 billion is not enough, and they're right. $500 billion is a third of 1 year's problem. Up here, that's way too bold, but it's not even enough. But we have to counterbalance and understand the alternatives here. If we do nothing, all of the programs that people are so fond of extolling and saying, why we need to spend this money,
the senator has used 10 minutes of time,
will be gone. So I implore the American public and those here to look at this problem and to say to Congress, we're not doing enough. You must cut more. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Missouri is recognized.
I ask for consent to speak for up for 5 minutes.
Without objection.
Mr. President, we need to make serious and substantial cuts, and we also need to be willing to compromise. Cuts and compromise needs to be the dialogue that is occurring across the aisle and with each other. I have great respect for some of my colleagues on the other side that say that we have a structural debt problem and we've got to get to it. Certainly we do. But it is completely wrong that we would do massive, massive cuts all in one fell swoop right now with our economy in the position that it is. That would cause just as big a crisis as our failure to deal with our long-term structural debt. So that's where the compromise part comes in. We've got to do significant cuts now. We've got to put everything on the table and look at our long-term debt structure. And we need to figure out how we do that in a bipartisan way, because we're going to fail our country if no one is willing to compromise. The House's resolution, frankly, was not smart in the way they did the cuts. No one in any business would take all of the cuts out of one small sliver of their business. They would look at their entire business to try to find cost savings. It was not smart. All the pain was in one place, and they are killing off the very part of our budget that has the best chance of increasing economic activity in this country. The building of roads and bridges, the educating of our kids, the research and the science and development. So while their cuts were more substantial than the Democrats' plan in the Senate, they were not smart cuts. They did not spread the pain around. On the other hand, the Senate has not gone far enough. It is frankly disappointing to me. I still think that there are way too many people in denial around here about the nature of the problem and how serious it is. And I don't think we're demonstrating to the American people that we understand the nature of the problem when we present an alternative proposal with such a small number of cuts. So really, the sweet spot is somewhere in between these two approaches. Pain needs to be spread more broadly throughout the budget, so the pain is not so acute in one area of the budget. We need to look at all of the programs, put it all on the table, and we need to be willing to compromise. Let me point out a couple of places where I think some of these compromises could come easily. The Senate version that we're being asked to support today, which I will not be able to support, the Senate Democratic version, increases the President's budget in 15 different programs. Now think about that. We're trying to cut, and our appropriators have come up with a plan to increase 15 of the President's budget requests by a total of $2.6 billion. We're going the wrong direction here. We should be, at a minimum, cutting what the President has recommended cutting. And frankly, I think we need to go even further. And the Pentagon. Let me just give one example that came up in a hearing yesterday so people understand that there are real savings. We've got a Pentagon that we can't audit. We haven't been able to audit for decades. And it is frustrating that we don't have business systems in place that allow transparency and that allow wise choices in terms of the expenditure of dollars. In a hearing yesterday in the Armed Services Committee, I talked with the head of the Navy and the Marines about a system that they're putting in place to track equipment. Good idea, right? We want to track equipment. Now, the Army is putting in a system to track equipment. Now, here's the rub. They share equipment. Now, would you think that these two systems are going to talk to each other? Oh, no. No, they've been done separately. They don't talk to each other. Different software. We're going to have to spend more money for a mechanism so the two systems tracking equipment, sometimes the equipment they're sharing, so that we can at least see what's going on. And by the way, each one of these systems is billions of dollars. We could save billions of dollars by just saying to the Army and to the Marines, use the same software. Use the same program. That's the kind of savings that we can find in the Pentagon if we just look at the GAO high-risk list. The Air Force has been trying for years to put a resource management software in place. They're saying they can't even get there until 2017. Are you kidding? We have got to be more efficient with the dollars that we spend at the Pentagon, and we won't be if we always say yes and we never say no. There will be no incentive to find savings, to find more jointness among our different military branches in terms of administrative costs if we always say yes and never say no. So the pain has to be felt at the Pentagon, too. We cannot do this without pain being felt at the Pentagon. It's got to be across the board. It's got to be more substantial than $6.5 billion, and we all have to be willing to compromise. I will be voting no on both proposals for that reason, but I am anxious to sit down. I am anxious to sit down at the table and find those compromises.
Senator, use 5 minutes.
Make real cuts and move forward in a responsible way to show the American people that we get it. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Nebraska is recognized.
Mr. President, I ask consent to speak for up to 8 minutes.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise to speak about the two budget bills that we'll be voting on shortly that purport to cut spending in Washington. And I appreciate the comments of my good friend from Missouri, Senator McCaskill, in pointing out many of the shortcomings of the two pieces of legislation. I'm here to deliver a eulogy. Both bills are dead, and they deserve to be dead. One bill cuts too little. The other bill has too much hate. Neither one is serious. Most important, neither will pass, and they shouldn't pass because they're unfair. They're not in the best interests of Nebraskans and taxpayers across our country. About the only thing they're serious about is guaranteeing shutting down the government. Nebraskans want serious spending cuts, but these bills are loaded up with tricks, treats, gimmicks, and games. On one side, we see a bill that simply cuts too little. Now it purports to cut spending by $50 billion, but when you push through the thicket of gimmicks, it actually only cuts about $6 billion. In a budget of more than $1 trillion, a cut of about 0.5% just isn't enough. It won't get runaway government spending under control, nor will it begin to bring down that unsustainable national debt that endangers America's future. To win my support, there need to be more cuts in spending, and they need to be real and reasonable, which brings me to the other bill. The other bill is H.R. 1. It's chock full of provisions pushing a political agenda snuck into the bill in the middle of the night. One provision is an attack on America's farmers. It aims to block allowing the use of more American-made ethanol in our cars and trucks. Today, cars and trucks can use gas with 10% ethanol. The government has just approved a 15% ethanol blend. There's no cost, but that didn't stop some from sneaking in an unfair ban. Cutting back on ethanol at a time when gas prices are above $3.50 a gallon nationwide and rising fast is the wrong thing to do. Worse, it's a gift to foreign oil. Looking at all the violence and turmoil we're seeing today on TV in a key oil-producing region of the world, it seems the worst possible gift at the worst possible time. Another political agenda item in H.R. 1 will eliminate public television in Nebraska, an educational resource for our citizens and an informational lifeline in many parts of Nebraska. This bill makes other sneaky attempts to push a political agenda. It eliminates poison control centers, blocks a consumer database people might use to determine a product's safety, and keeps high-speed Internet service out of rural areas. H.R. 1 also limits urban homeland security funds and sets the limit arbitrarily at 25 cities. That will likely bar any future funding to the largest city in my state. While some might not think of Omaha as a terror target, let me tell you, it's the home to U.S. Strategic Command, a major national telecommunications hub, and is a key rail and highway crossroads for freight and transportation. On the spending side, the House bill makes unfair cuts to the states, including mine, that will cost Nebraskans hundreds of jobs and, indeed, unnecessary hardship. For example, more than 1,200 Nebraska children would lose access to Head Start, which has proven to help students complete high school. The bill cuts Pell tuition grants that 43,000 Nebraskans need to afford college. In addition, the $75 million cut for homeless veterans housing vouchers seems absurd. To quote the director of the Omaha Veterans Hospital, quote, "This is a very big deal for those veterans and the community," end of quote. This could impact 10,000 homeless veterans nationwide, and in Omaha alone, 240 veterans have used these vouchers, and there are likely 600 more who need this help to find permanent housing. After all is said and done, the bottom line is Washington just hasn't got serious. And I won't be held accountable for the failings of the House and the Senate. I can, however, be held accountable for one of the 12 spending bills that fund the government. As chairman of the Senate Appropriations Legislative Branch Subcommittee, I have the responsibility to oversee the spending bill for Congress. We cut spending last year. We're cutting spending by 5% this year, and we'll be back for more cuts next year. Last year, Senator Murkowski and I did this before all of the campaign-style speeches about cutting began. It was clear she didn't bring a political agenda to the table, and I hope she knows that I didn't either. And this year, in working with Senator Hoeven, and also a former governor, as I am, who is now ranking member on the subcommittee, I have every reason to believe that he also will be serious and fair as we reduce spending in next year's budget. Cutting the spending for Congress, for our offices, committees and staff, our buildings, our police, our efforts on this Hill is an effort to lead by example. Our committee's bipartisan example could serve as a model for how the other 11 spending bills are handled. Our message, to paraphrase Harry Truman, is, the buck shrinks here. Soon we'll vote on the two spending bills. One has done nothing to attract Republicans. The other has done nothing to attract Democrats. In the end, you have bills that will divide. They do not unite Congress. For the reasons I've given, I will vote against both. Then, what's next? Well, Washington needs to put aside all the games and gimmicks, the treats and the tricks, and come together to do what's right for the American people by passing a budget. They deserve it, they're owed it, and it's now time. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Oregon is recognized.
Mr. President, this debate today is all about jobs. The House Republican budget, which we'll soon be voting on in this body, will destroy 700,000 American jobs. That is the estimate put forward by Mark Zandi, who advised John McCain's presidential campaign and now works for the nonpartisan Moody's Group. Now, that sort of estimate isn't just a voice in the wilderness. It's repeated by major group after major group. Ben Bernanke, chairman of the Fed, said last week the plan would cost, and I quote, a couple 100,000 jobs. Goldman Sachs analyst Alec Phillips put forward an estimate that said this House job-killing plan will reduce in the second and third quarter of the next year the economy of the United States by 1.5 to 2 percentage points. Now, what is 2% of a $15 trillion economy? $300 billion. So whether you view it in terms of the gross domestic product or you view it in terms of the number of jobs of Americans taken away by the job-killing Republican plan, this bill is a disaster. House Resolution 1 that we'll be voting on later today. I want us to focus on this number because I can tell you folks back home in Oregon want to create jobs. They want us to put America back to work. They don't want to have a plan put forward that continues to pay enormous bonuses to the billionaires of Wall Street and creates enormous special tax bonuses for the millionaires who are making their tax returns while taking out this huge economic meltdown on working people. Now, let's review how this all came to pass. You'll recall that during the second Bush administration, there was a plan to take and launch 2 foreign wars and not pay for them. And then it proceeded to take and create Medicare Part D and not pay for it. And then to give bonus tax breaks to millionaires and billionaires and not pay for it. And reverse an enormous annual surplus and turn it to an enormous annual deficit, and in the process produce a very tiny, modest expansion in which working people actually lost ground. So that expansion all went to the very top. Well, that was just the beginning. Before my colleagues across the aisle decided that they were going to deregulate retail mortgages in order to ramp up predatory mortgages, produce a huge balloon in the real estate market, deregulate Wall Street so they could proceed to securitize these mortgages and have those blow up in financial institutions across America and have the economy melt down in 2008, 2009. That's how we got where we are right now. And now, rather than take on a plan that creates jobs in America, the plan is to take and eliminate 700,000 jobs across this country. Now, let's be clear. There is a tremendous amount we can do to reduce the deficit. A plan was put forward just a few weeks ago in which we get rid of those bonus breaks for those who are in the top 2% of this country. Saves about $50 billion a year in real hard cash. Plan has been put forward to get rid of the tax breaks for the oil and gas industry, which is doing very well and doing even better now with the oil market speculators driving it up to a value of over $100 a barrel. These things actually close the deficit. They don't destroy the economy. They actually create the sort of plan that can create jobs across this nation and put people back to work and invest in the future of our nation rather than saying, let's take after we blew up the economy and let's take and make working people do even worse. So I'm going to just summarize by saying embedded in House Resolution 1 is attack after attack after attack. For example, taking on preventative health care. Preventative health care for women across this country by taking out Title X. Or how about the attack on homeless veterans? I'll tell you, I go throughout my state, and folks say, you know, a lot of our sons and daughters are coming home from Iraq and Afghanistan, and we need to support them. The transition back home is very, very difficult. There's a lot of post-traumatic stress. And instead of supporting them, my colleagues across the aisle have produced a plan that says, let's take away that support for housing for the homeless, housing for veterans. And I could go on because the list is so long and the attacks are so many. But that option, while it does only a modest amount in the short term affect the deficit, it proceeds to do devastating results to the economy. And what happens when the economy will collapse again? Double-dip recession at the courtesy of House Resolution 1, then the debt goes back up. So it's a lose on both fronts. So with that, Mr. President, I'm going to conclude and say we need a responsible plan to reduce the deficit, not a plan to bomb the economy on the heads of our working Americans. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you. Would you kindly advise me when I have 10 minutes left, please?
The chair will do so.
I'm coming to the floor today to talk about where we find ourselves. Nobody has spent more time in the last 6.5 years on this floor talking about the problem that's in front of us. And hopefully I can do that in a way that would never impugn the motives of my fellow senators. I find it really interesting that we're where we are today, and I enjoyed the speech from the senator from Nebraska, because one of the things about it that he stated is we have to come together. And you're not going to get coming together when you have the speech that we just heard, when you have a speech that impugns the motives of the people in the other body trying to solve some of the problems. The first point I'd like to make is we're at a place where we're going to vote on 2 bills with no amendments. Since when did the Senate give up its ability to try to amend bills going forward? And the reason we're not is because had we not agreed to it, the tree would have been filled up and we would have either voted for cloture or not cloture. But the fact is, in this body, we ought to be about amending what we don't like in the bills. If the senator from Washington, Oregon, doesn't like what's in the bills, he ought to have a chance to try to change it. And yet we find ourselves with a very short period of time to debate what is the #1 risk for us as a nation today. And I've read all the economic studies that have been put out on H.R. 1, and I've also read what the economists on the other side say in terms of the false assumptions that have been made in it. And I don't know which one are right, but the fact that we're not going to have an actual debate on advancing amendments. Let me describe where we are today, just so everybody knows.
We're adding $4.507 billion a day to the deficit. Every day. We're borrowing in the international market $3 billion a day. By the time I finish this talk, we will have added $98 million to the deficit. Adding something to the deficit, what does that mean? That's the same thing as saying we're taking the opportunity away from the children and the generation that follows us by putting them in debtor's prison. And that's exactly what we've done. I don't care where the blame lies. What we have to start doing is not spending money that we don't have. We can't continue to spend money we don't have. And it's very interesting that a week ago this past Monday, that the GAO issued a report. It covers 1/3 of the federal government and lists the duplications that they found. We asked them to do that with the last debt limit extension in the federal government. And according to my calculations, there's at least $100 billion that isn't touched by either of these bills that could be eliminated tomorrow and saved against our children's future. We don't have an opportunity to offer amendments to do that on this bill. Here's real data compiled by the Government Accountability Office where multitudes of members from this body have called me and said, how do we help you do that? Well, the first way you help me do that is make sure we have an open process on the floor where we can offer an amendment to do it. Let me just highlight for a minute some of the things that were in this wonderful report put forward by the GAO. We have 47 job training programs across 9 different agencies that we're spending $18 billion a year on. Not one of them has a metric on whether or not it's successful or actually accomplishing what it's supposed to do. Why do we need 18 different job training programs? Why do we need any job training program if we can't show that it's working? Why are we spending money on a job training program that isn't working? We have 5 departments, 8 agencies, 24 presidential appointees that oversees our work on bioterrorism. We don't have one agency responsible for it and one group of people. We're spending $6.5 billion a year on bioterrorism, and the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing. We have 20 agencies, 56 programs dedicated to teaching America financial literacy. We have no moral authority to teach anybody financial literacy when we have a deficit that's going to be $1.65 trillion this year, and we're $14.2 trillion in debt. We have 80 economic development programs across 4 different agencies where we spend $6.5 billion a year. We don't know if they're working. Maybe they are, but we ought to know it before we spend money that we don't have on things we don't know that they're working. We have 15 agencies covering 30 different food safety laws. 15 different agencies. We have 18 separate nutrition programs. We spend $62.5 billion a year. $30 billion of it's borrowed, and we don't know the results. Why shouldn't we have one? And why shouldn't we put a metric on it to know whether or not it's working? We have 20 homeless programs. We heard mentioned the homeless programs. We're going to spend $2.9 billion, 7 different agencies, and if you add up the money over the last 10 years that we spent on homeless programs, we can buy every homeless person in this country a $200,000 home. And yet we continue to send money. We don't know if they're working. They certainly would be better off if they had $200,000 for their care for the future, rather than continue the programs that we have no metrics on. We have 82 teacher training quality programs, 82 of them. They're across 10 different federal government agencies, and we spend $4 billion a year on them. And we have no idea whether or not they're successful. Matter of fact, we do know they're successful. We're not successful in education in our country today. Are we getting value for what we're spending? And remember, 40 cents of every dollar that we spend on these programs, we're borrowing from the Chinese.
We have 52 programs for entrepreneurial efforts. Since when is that a role of the federal government? 35 programs just to oversee infrastructure. 27 different programs for commercial buildings. 28 programs to oversee new markets outside of this country. 28 programs. 20 programs for business incubators. 17 different grant programs for disaster preparedness. 17 different grant programs for disaster preparedness. 34 areas where federal agencies, offices, or programs have redundant objectives or fragmented across several departments. 2,100 data centers for 24 agencies. Consolidating them could save $200 billion over a decade. We can't even offer that amendment today. That's $20 billion a year. We have the ability. There is the waste. There is the incompetency in what Congress has done through its duplication efforts and its lack of oversight to solve a great portion of our fiscal problems. We can do it, but we can't do it when the process doesn't allow the debate and votes on those specific issues. I want to talk for a minute about what is ahead of us as a nation, because I think it's really important. I'm very sorry that my friend, President Obama, has not led on this issue. Let me tell you what is in front of us. What is in front of us is rising interest rates. What is in front of us is rising competition for capital to fund our deficits. The historic rate for us on our debt as a nation over the last 35 years has been greater than 6%. Last year we paid less than 2% for what we have on the books. Less than 2% average. And our historical time frame on when that money is due is usually about 10-plus years. We're now financing that at 59 months. What's going to happen in the world next year? Well, the difference in terms of sovereign financing, that's other countries that also need to borrow money, including us, and what's available to finance that next year is $7 trillion. In other words, there's a $7 trillion shortfall in terms of what's going to be available to finance. If you got to borrow $7 trillion in the world, more than what's available, what do you think is going to happen to interest rates? What's going to happen? Well, they're going to rise. So we're going to be faced with one of the following two dilemmas unless Congress gets its act together. And here's the two dilemmas. The first is our average interest cost goes back to its historical cost. If that happens, immediately we're going to see $640 billion more a year in interest cost. 640. We only had 200 billion, less than 200 billion this year. We're going to see 640 billion increase. That doesn't help any person that has a need. All that does is that's paid out to our debtors. That's a very real risk for us right now. That goes to say that we don't have a lot of time because what we know is interest rates are going to rise. So it's mandatory that Congress do what the American people have known for a while we need to do, and that's live within our means. Now, let me describe the second problem, or a second solution, and that's what the Federal Reserve will do. The Federal Reserve will just print more money. Well, if you print more money and you don't have any base for doing that, that creates what's called inflation. It's called debasing your currency. What happens in America if we decide that the way we're going to get out of our problem is to debase our currency and print more money, like the Fed is doing right now with what's called quantitative easing 2. They're printing $600 billion worth of money between now and June. Well, what happens is the value of everything you own in real terms declines. in nominal dollars goes up, but the purchasing power of the average middle-class family in this country declines tragically. And the safety net that this country has been known for those that are far less fortunate than the average American, will be absolutely unaffordable. Totally unaffordable. So you're talking about the destruction of the best of America, our middle class. You're talking about taking opportunities away. So what's the answer? The answer is not to have more partisan statements by Senator Merkley, impugning the motives of people who are trying to do right things, even though different from his opinion. The answer is for Congress to get together and recognize the threat to our future and give up long-held positions to solve the greater good. That means you have to move. That means you have to recognize that you can't have it all your way. How do you actually do that? Well, the one failure of Congress in my time in Congress, both in the House in the mid-'90s and now in the Senate since 2004, is we don't do oversight. How did we end up with this report that shows $100 billion in duplications? The only way it could have happened is we weren't watching. We weren't doing the oversight. So one of the things that needs to happen is the chairman of every committee ought to spend 90% of their time oversight things we're already doing rather than working on creating new bills and new programs. And the second thing that ought to happen is we ought to have a vigorous debate with amendments on the floor of the U.S. Senate to solve some of the very real problems we have. It's not all that hard to solve these problems, but what happens is in partisan bodies, people talk past one another. Nobody would decline the fact that we ought to get rid of unused property. We can save $8 billion a year if we get rid of the unused federal property. Anybody disagree with that? But we haven't done it. There's $8 billion. We're going to get out of this $1.6 trillion hole a couple of $billion at a time. And so we ought to do that. We ought to get rid of the wasteful printing at the government printing office. Save several $100 million over the next 10 years. We ought to quit paying contractors who don't do their job bonuses, and we have documented that multiple agencies are doing that on performance bonuses when they don't meet the performance requirements. We ought to collect the unpaid taxes from federal employees. It's $3 billion. And these are the settled claims. These aren't the unsettled claims.
You're notified.